All right, shalom, shalom. Before I get started, I want to start off by giving all honor and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Harakak, Kwadash, Laiwalam Yum. Double honors to my apostles and elders at Great Millstone. Shalom to the elect, the ones out there who are doing this work diligently and chiefly keeping the faith, making your calling and your election sure. And without further ado, we're going to get right into it. I got this video pulled up, goes into the massacre they erased from history, and you can see it's a thing that's going on right now where they're trying to erase what happened in slavery. They're trying to erase it from the history books. They're trying to erase it from history. All right, but part of our job is to remember what happened to us in the past, so that way we can constantly reflect on what the Lord did to us for our disobedience. So let's get right into it.
The stories we've been told about American history often skim the darkest chapters. These stories tell of victory and valor, brave leaders and noble causes. But beneath those bright pages lies a shadow. Most stories we've been told about American history often skip the darkest chapters. These stories tell of victory and noble causes. But beneath those bright pages lies a shadow most classrooms barely touch. In the decades after the Civil War, liberated Black communities across the country won new rights and built their own schools, churches, and businesses. But each time Black Americans stepped forward to claim the rights promised to them, armed white mobs gathered to push them back. These were organized attacks, often carried out in broad daylight, with the clear goal of crushing Black political power and terrorizing entire communities. Homes were burned, ballot boxes were destroyed, families were hunted. In town after town, progress was answered with bloodshed. While history books may celebrate heroic generals or bold legislation, they usually sidestep what happened on the ground, a string of brutal massacres of Black people. In this video, we'll be exploring those hidden massacres from the Reconstruction South to the segregated Jim Crow era. Because in order to know where we truly stand today, we have to face what was done in the past and look directly at the parts of American history that were deliberately kept in the dark. Before we begin, we want to let you know that many unfiltered discussions like this are increasingly difficult to keep visible on this platform. Our videos have been experiencing reduced reach, which means important historical stories often do not reach the people who want to hear them. Because of that, we created a space outside the algorithm. If you want to stay updated on our latest videos and also receive content we cannot always post here, join our web community and make. In Grant Parish, Louisiana, tension had been building for months. Before Easter Sunday, 1873, Reconstruction governments, backed by newly enfranchised Black voters and federal authority, had taken office across the South. In Colfax, a disputed state election left two rival governments claiming power. Black citizens, many of them formerly enslaved, supported the Republican ticket that had been certified as lawful. Fearing that white Democrats would seize control by force, a group of Black militia members and local supporters gathered at the parish courthouse to defend the elected officials. Few could have known that what followed would not be peaceful political discussion, but a calculated assault that would carve its brutality into the pages of American history forever. On April 13, 1873, a force of roughly 300 armed white men, including former Confederate soldiers and members of white radical groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, advanced on the courthouse. They brought rifles, pistols, and even a small cannon. The Black defenders, estimated at around 60 to 100 men, were outnumbered and outgunned. After hours of gunfire, the attackers set the courthouse ablaze and fired the cannon into the building. Surrounded by flames and smoke, the defenders eventually raised a white flag in surrender. But the violence did not end there. As Black men fled the burning building or surrendered, many were captured, disarmed, and executed. Survivors later testified that prisoners were shot at close range, some in the back of the head. Others were hunted down in nearby fields and woods. By the time it was over, approximately 150 Black men were dead. Only 3 white attackers were reported killed. The massacre was quickly reframed in local newspapers as a riot, implying mutual aggression rather than one-sided slaughter. In reality, it was a calculated act meant to crush black political participation and restore white democratic control. Federal authorities eventually charged 97 white men under the Enforcement Acts, laws designed to curb racial terror. A handful were convicted. But in 1876, the United States Supreme Court overturned those convictions in United States versus Cruikshank, ruling that the federal government had limited power to prosecute individuals for civil rights violations. That decision severely weakened federal efforts to combat white supremacist violence and signaled the unraveling of Reconstruction. Colfax became
No, that's crazy right there, right? All right. It shows you that, in these systems, in these courtrooms that's ran by the enemy, which all of them are, they will give you no justice, right? That's why you still got people who are shooting us down in the street, but they're able to go home to their families after they've committed murder at a traffic stop, or after they committed murder, at a store or whatever. Man, these people really don't care about us, and he discarded us. But this is what the Lord said is going to happen. This is Isaiah 34:8. It says, "For it is the day of the Lord's revenge, the year when Edom will be paid back for all it did to Israel." Now, this is in the NLT. All right, this Isaiah 34:8 in the KJV, it says, "For it is the day of the Lord's vengeance and the year of recompenses for the controversy of Zion." So all these things that they have done unto us, they will pay for it. All right, it's not gonna be it's not gonna be like this forever, where they're getting away with what they are doing to us, man. This is Second Thessalonians chapter 1 and verse 6 in the NLT. It says, "In his justice he will pay back those who persecute you." Second Thessalonians 1 and 6 in the KJV, it says, "Seeing it is a righteous thing with Yahweh to recompense tribulation to them that trouble you." So these things that we're going through now, these people are gonna be they're gonna be held accountable for what they have done unto us, man. All right. The Lord said, what in Revelation 18, reward her double, right? This is Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 43. It says, "Rejoice, O ye nations, with his people, for he will avenge the blood of his servants, and he will render vengeance to his adversaries, and will be merciful unto his land and to his people." You see? So these massacres that they're trying to write out of history, the Lord remembers this, and also the Lord allowed a particular group of people, the elect, to remember these things too as well. Lord willing, I'm a part of that number. All right, let's continue on.
turning point. It demonstrated that organized racial terror could succeed without lasting consequences.
Well,
And many others across the South, it was a brutal lesson that political rights on paper meant little without protection in practice. Soon, similar scenes replayed elsewhere. In 1876 in Hamburg, South Carolina, tensions flared after a minor 4th of July dispute between white residents and members of a black militia unit. What could have been resolved locally was instead inflamed by white rifle clubs determined to reassert political control. Hundreds of armed white men surrounded the black militia's armory. After a standoff and exchanges of gunfire, the black defenders surrendered under the promise of safety. That promise was hollow. Several freedmen were taken prisoner, marched away from the scene, and executed. Across the South during the 1870s, groups such as the Red Shirts in the Carolinas and Mississippi and the White League in Louisiana functioned as organized political militias for the Democratic Party. They rode openly with weapons, disrupted Republican meetings, assaulted elected officials, and used targeted killings to suppress black turnout. By 1877, federal troops had gone home, and Jim Crow segregation was imposed. The memories of those violent nights were quickly buried. Decades later, historical markers and monuments honored the white attackers as defenders of order and accused black citizens of rebellion. In Colfax, Louisiana, a 1920 monument was erected bearing the inscription, "Erected to the memory of the heroes who fell in the Colfax riot fighting for white supremacy." Meanwhile, in many textbooks, the massacres were minimized or framed as riots, suggesting mutual blame. A stark turn came 25 years after Colfax in the coastal city of Wilmington, North Carolina, 1898. Here, an integrated government of black and white leaders ran the city peacefully. Blacks held the mayor's office, the treasurer's office, and ran banks and newspapers. White supremacists refused to believe this could last. On November 10th, a planned armed uprising swept the city. A white mob burned the offices of the Daily Record, Wilmington's black-owned newspaper, and shouted for black officials to resign. They shot and killed dozens of black residents. Estimates say at least 60 men, possibly more, sent others fleeing into the swamps, and forced the black mayor and aldermen to step down at gunpoint. By dawn, the city's leaders had been overthrown. White terrorists had executed the only successful coup, d'état in American history. Afterwards, hundreds of black families fled Wilmington under threat of death. The official record called it a race riot or Negro insurrection, blaming black people for the violence. It took a century before historians recognized Wilmington 1898 as the calculated massacre and coup that it was. Only in recent years have schools begun to teach the truth, that terrified black citizens were the victims, not the instigators, of mass murder and political overthrow.
So it makes you question all these different events that they labeled as riots, right? It shows that they have a perpetual hatred. And it wasn't Jake, it wasn't the Israelites, the so called blacks, who started this stuff, right? This was done by the so called whites, right? The Edomites who envied Jake, who hated Jake, right? Now they have a perpetual hatred against us. According to the scriptures, it says Ezekiel 35 and 5, it says, "Because thou hast had a perpetual hatred and hast shed the blood of the children of Israel by the force of the sword in the time of their calamity, in the time that their iniquity had an end." Verse 6, "Therefore, as I live, saith the Lord power, I will prepare thee unto blood, and blood shall pursue thee. Since thou hast not hated blood, even blood shall pursue thee." Right? So because of these Edomites, these so-called white people, because of their perpetual hatred, the Lord is going to destroy them because of what they did unto us. Right? You know, throughout history, they played the blame game, right? Think of Tulsa, Oklahoma. The reason that they had to burn that down was a so-called white woman got raped. Like it's the same thing that they do over and over again, right? They use that same excuse over and over again to gather and to burn Jake cities. You see? Now, this video, I already noticed, like this video is being shadow banned right now. You know, as we speak, it's being shadow banned. I'm looking on my other device and the video did not even get pretty much the video on my other YouTube channel wasn't even seen. I got no notification or nothing. So they're already shadow banning this video on YouTube, right? But I'm gonna just keep going. You know, whoever sees it, sees it. Whoever don't, is all through the spirit. But I'm just letting you know it's shadow banned. You know, I did not get a notification on my other YouTube channel.
20 years after Wilmington, a wave of post-war racial terror swept through the South during the Red Summer of 1919. In the Arkansas Delta in late September 1919 at Elaine, African-American sharecroppers' hopes for justice ended in blood. Hundreds of black farmers had gathered at a church meeting house to organize for better cotton prices. When hostile white men tried to disrupt the meeting, a shootout broke out in which one white security officer died. The local sheriff labeled it an insurrection. What followed was a massacre. By early October, between 500 and 1,000 armed white men, plantation guards, deputized vigilantes, and neighbors descended on Elaine, searching for Union members and any black person in sight. Federal troops eventually arrived, but only after the killing was done. White witnesses later testified that mob members hunted African Americans like a game. By the time the gunfire finally stopped, historians estimate that between 100 and 200 black men women, and children had been killed in and around Elaine. White officials at the time claimed that only 2 black people had died, a number that defied eyewitness accounts and later research. At least 30 homes were burned to the ground. Families fled into nearby swamps and woods, hiding for days without food, afraid that any movement would draw more gunfire. No white attacker was ever convicted. Instead, the legal system turned its force against the survivors. Local authorities arrested 122 black residents and charged them with murder and insurrection. 12 men were sentenced to death in rushed proceedings marked by intimidation and all-white juries. It was only through the intervention of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People and the relentless appeals led by black attorneys that those death sentences were ultimately overturned by the United States Supreme Court. The Elaine Massacre, the deadliest racial slaughter in Arkansas history, remained largely absent from textbooks for decades. When it was mentioned at all, it was often described as a farmer's riot, a phrase that blurred the truth. The Elaine Massacre, the deadliest racial slaughter in Arkansas history, remained largely absent from textbooks for decades. When it was mentioned at all, it was often described as a farmer's riot, a phrase that blurred the truth. The violence was not a spontaneous uprising. In reality, it was the mass killing of black sharecroppers who had organized to demand fair payment for their labor. Then,
This is Zechariah 11, verse 5. Whose possessors slay them and hold themselves not guilty. And they that sell them say, Blessed be the Lord, for I am rich, and their own shepherds pity them not. All right, you got the black boule out here, right? They stand as vanguard for the rich, for the elite, for these Edomites, right? Before you even get to the Edomites, you got to go through people who look like you, right? They sold out for the riches of this world, right? To be comfortable in this world. But the Lord let us know in this verse here that our own shepherds pity us not, as well as the ones who possess us, right? Which are the Edomites right now. They slay us and they hold themselves not guilty. Now you can see that happening constantly, like I brought up before with different traffic stops. You had what Mike Brown, Sandra Bland, right? Trayvon Martin, Tamir Rice. The list goes on, man. Right? They slay us and they hold themselves not guilty. You see? So the Lord has got to pay them back for what they are doing unto us. Right? That's the only answer. And I'm showing you these different massacres to stir up your spirit. You know, this is Deuteronomy chapter 32 and verse 7. It says, Remember the days of old, consider the years of many generations. Ask thy father, and he will show thee, thy elders, and they will tell thee. So by us remembering the days of old, considering all these things, it's supposed to put you in fear of the Lord and repent and change. And also is to encourage you to keep moving in the faith, right? Exhorting you to keep going. Why? Because the Lord is going to pay these people back for what they have done unto us. And all we have to do is just hold on to the truth and keep prophesying, and we're going to be able to see the downfall of our enemies. The Lord said, "Only with our eyes shall we see shall we see the destruction of the wicked." So we're going to be able to see, Lord willing, I'm a part of that number. We're going to be able to see how the wicked get destroyed on that day. But right now, we get to see how the wicked is falling too. Right, the dollar is collapsing. The nations are, at World War III pretty much. All right, it's going to ramp up, of course, but we're really in World War III. You got nations warring. You got Ukraine versus Russia. You got Iran versus United States, and it's only going to pick up more and more. Right? Let's continue on.
Became Tulsa, Oklahoma in late May 1921. The massacre, now arguably the most infamous that most Americans still largely didn't learn in school. In Tulsa's Greenwood district, often called Black Wall Street, African Americans had built a thriving community of shops, churches, schools, and hotels. On the night of May 31st, a rumor of a white woman's scream in an elevator inflamed Tulsa's white residents. By the next morning, organized white mobs, many deputized as special police, invaded Greenwood as if on a military operation. They flew over the district in airplanes, dropping incendiary devices.
So you see, they bombed us, man. America bombed their own land to destroy us. That's the perpetual hatred. You cannot forget these things, man. You got to keep these things in remembrance and understand who your enemy is. All right? The scripture says, never trust thine enemy, for as iron rusteth, so is their wickedness. They bombed the cities. America bombed their own lands to get rid of so-called Black Wall Street, man.
They machine-gunned families on their porches. They looted, bombed, and burned some 35 square blocks of homes and businesses. In a span of about 18...
That's just hatred. They just despise us that much where they want to keep us in a downtrodden position. That's why the Lord is coming back to destroy their ass, man.
18 hours, the heart of Greenwood was razed. More than 1,000 buildings lay in ashes. Credible estimates put the death toll somewhere between 50 and 300 African-American men, women, and children. The city officially listed only 36 victims, but investigators now say the true number will never be known as bodies were thrown into unmarked graves in the river. Thousands of survivors were forced into makeshift internment camps under armed guard. Afterwards, Tulsa's business leaders pledged to rebuild Greenwood, but then quietly imposed new building codes and mortgages designed to prevent it. The city never offered compensation for the losses. Perpetrators faced no indictments. For nearly 3/4 of a century, the Tulsa Massacre was a blank space in textbooks and local memory. It was taught, if at all, as a race riot blamed on Black citizens. Only in the 1990s did survivor accounts and a state commission break the silence, uncovering graves in unmarked Tulsa plots. As one federal report later concluded, the white mob's attack was so systematic and coordinated that it transcended mere mob violence. Today, the Tulsa Massacre remains a symbol of how quickly prosperity and lives could be lost when racial hatred was unleashed, and how thoroughly it was hidden from history for decades. Less than 2 years after Tulsa, Florida saw the same nightmare. In Rosewood, an all-Black mill town of about 200 people, a similar accusation of assault by a white woman led to revenge. On January 1st, 1920...
You see, they using the same excuse over and over again to mob up and destroy our businesses, to destroy our livelihood. They say the same thing. A white woman screamed, or a white woman getting raped. This and that, man. These people hate us. And you got Jake wanting to be friends with these people, and they show us throughout centuries that they despise us, that they hate us. All right. And the scriptures let us know that they hate us. All right. But the thing is, you got the elect waking up, and now the elect hate them too. All right. According to David, our Lord David, he said, what? Should not I hate them, O Lord, that hate thee? So when you come into this truth, you actually start hating these people because of the hatred that they have displayed unto us. You got Jake constantly trying to turn the other cheek and accept these people after all of the destruction and the pain that they cause unto us. But then you got the elect who the Lord has woken up and given the spirit to. The elect hate them too. Like, I hate these people, man. I hate them with a passion. And I want the Lord to get rid of every last one of them. And he's going to answer the prayers because he already ordained that he's going to get rid of them. Watch this. This is the book of Obadiah 1, and I'm going to start at verse 10. It says, for thy violence against thy brother Jacob, shame shall cover thee, and thou shalt be cut off forever. So these Edomites shall be cut off forever, man. All right, let's get Job real quick. Job chapter 20, right? Job 20 and verse 5, and I'm about to end up wrapping it up. This is Job chapter 20 and verse 5. I'm going to start at verse 4. It says, knowest thou not this of old, since man was placed upon earth? Verse 5, that the triumphant of the wicked is short, and the joy of the hypocrite but for a moment. Right? This is a moment compared to eternity. Right? Yeah, they're ruling now, but eventually they're going to be in slavery according to the scriptures. And then after 1,000 years of slavery, they're going to be wiped off the face of the earth, these Edomites. All right, that's what the Bible say. Okay, continuing on in Job chapter 20 and verse 6, it says, though his excellency mount up to the heavens and his head reach unto the clouds, right? Verse 7, yet he shall perish forever like his own dung. They which have seen him shall say, where is he? Verse 8, he shall fly away as a dream and shall not be found. Yet he shall be chased away as a vision of the night. Verse 9, the eye also which saw him shall see him no more, neither shall his place any more behold him. So, because of these people' perpetual hatred, because they're wicked, the Lord is going to take them out. All right, the Lord is going to take them out, and they're going to be non-existent in the near future. So, yeah, they're ruling the earth now, right? Yeah, they're taking us through a world of pain, but the Lord is going to vindicate us. The Lord is going to free us from the hands of these oppressors. And that's what you see going on right now. That's why all these nations gathering together for war. It's for the controversy of Zion. All right.
3 white vigilantes flooded Rosewood. For several days, they burned homes and churches, shot black residents fleeing the flames, and lynched any they could. At least 6 black inhabitants were killed, and 2 whites accidentally lost their lives. Terrified survivors escaped into the swamp, hiding for days until the mob's fury died down. By mid-January, Rosewood was wiped off the map. The town's name vanished from school books. In fact, its existence barely surfaced until a Tampa reporter reopened the case in 1982. Only then did Florida admit the truth, authorizing in 1994 a landmark bill of compensation, $150,000 each to the few surviving victims, plus college scholarships for descendants. But by that point, nearly everyone involved had passed on, and most of Rosewood's story had been told too late. All of these events share a grim pattern. Each happened when black people dared to vote, own land, or form institutions. Each was crushed by a deliberate outburst of white violence. Countless other incidents fit this mold. In the 1920 election in Florida, a Jim Crow mob drove every black resident of Ocoee from town. In 1919 alone, there were violent attacks on black neighborhoods in Chicago, D.C., Knoxville, and dozens of other cities. In the late 1800s, black towns in Georgia, Mississippi, and elsewhere were assaulted with little fanfare. Yet very few are covered in standard textbooks. In fact, after these massacres, the official story usually blamed black communities for insurrection or rioting. Even though all of these happened years ago, these omissions still matter very much today. The violence of the Reconstruction era and the early 20th century was part of a national project to restore racial hierarchy after slavery's end. By erasing these stories, textbooks whitewash history, hiding how severely black Americans have been targeted. Acknowledging the full truth is the only way for our community to truly heal. Yes, these massacres are not just problems of the past, because their legacies echo in the present. Jim Crow laws, segregated neighborhoods, and distrust in institutions trace back to these tragic moments. Remembering Colfax, Wilmington, Elaine, Tulsa, and Rosewood is an act of justice to the victims. It forces America to confront how the rule of law once failed them and demands that history teachers tell the whole story. In revising and correcting the record, we honor those whose lives and dreams were destroyed. No longer can we afford to let their blood disappear from our pages. These chapters, once erased, must now be taught so that every student knows how close our nation came to repeating unthinkable violence and why preventing it remains our collective responsibility. Before you go, just a quick...
So that's the point, man. The point is, the massacres that took place was covered up as riots or insurrections done by so-called blacks. And they try to hide it from the histories. But it's our job to remember the history to understand the mystery. Now, what is the mystery? Who Babylon was, right? Mystery Babylon. To the masses, people don't know who Babylon is. But according to the scriptures, Babylon is America. So hopefully this was edifying. I'm going to end it by giving all honor and glory to Yahweh, Bahashem, Yahweh Shai, Bahashem, Harakak Kwadash, Lai Yum. Double honors once again to my apostles and elders at Great Millstone. Shalom once again to the elect. All right, a Baba Ball.